we just really experience the power of media. You know, it can be used to bring just another dimension to the work that we do and how to understand the world and each other. And so this conversation is really about giving you an overview on what is media literacy from the landscape to how it applies to the classroom. So this is like your Princeton review, if that's still around, of media literacy. So just to start off, I'm actually going to pass it to Erin. You know, as the founder of Media Literacy Now, you've been doing this work for about 10 years. So, you know, I learned earlier that it's been in Canada for quite a while, but this topic is very new to the US, and so I would just love to hear from you, you know, your personal story, you know, the work of Media Literacy Now, and why you chose for this to be something that you really made your life.
Okay, I'll start with, is this working? I'll start with why, and it's, as a journalist, I have noticed for a long time that people were not really understanding the need for good, solid journalism for the role of journalism in a democracy. I was concerned for many years about women's progress, the advancements of women, because of the representation in media, and mainstream media, and how really it's almost like an early training ground of sexism in the media. And finally, as a parent, just seeing the kinds of ideas and values that were being almost pressed on my kids that were really not necessarily what I would want them to learn. So, what are we doing? I talked to, actually it started because I talked to my son's 5th grade teacher and about media literacy, and she actually created a program for her own students. From there we worked on a grant for the whole school for all the teachers to learn and for them to be able to integrate media literacy into all their classes. From there I worked on introducing a bill at the State House. It turned out we had a great time. We had a hearing where great people talked about the need for media literacy, and all of these lawmakers were there hearing and asking questions. They were so engaged. But then it turned out it takes 10 years to pass a bill. So it became clear that we needed to go beyond Massachusetts, and at this point we have a national network of advocates, grassroots advocates, who are working to talk to policymakers at all levels, local, state, national, seeking to make sure that people understand that media literacy needs to be an essential part of education.
Thank you. And I know media literacy was a new topic for me. How would you define it?
Well, there are a number of definitions out there. We base our definition on the premise that media literacy is literacy in the 21st century. So, like reading and writing, it's decoding messages of all kinds from all sources. It's creating media, and then it's understanding the media systems that are shaping us and ourselves as individuals and as a society.
Thank you, snaps. I love that you mentioned systems, because Michael Slavey, you work in the system. You work, how do these systems work together? You know, it's not just these, you know, Facebook's a media company. So explain to us, educate us on how these systems really play together.
I'm that one for the ones who can't. Who is the guy up I like the systems component of the last part of the definition, and I think part of why this question is so difficult right now and why sort of we feel so lost in the landscape around us is that, as you know, from the very beginning of mass media with the printing press in the 15th century, we've lived in what felt like a channel-based world, where channels of media were relatively stable, where our roles in them, the channels expanded over time, radio, television, satellite. There was a drive in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s toward fragmenting those channels. But the channels felt stable, and our roles felt stable. You were a creator, a distributor, or an audience, and audience was a very passive experience. What has happened in the last decade is that it is not the acceleration of fragmentation, it's actually an entirely new landscape, an entirely new base map for how these things work. Rather than channels, we live in a massive graph where we are all creators, distributors, and consumers of content, where our potential power in the system is dramatically higher than it's ever been. The basic functions of the distributors as gatekeepers are starting to break down, which also means that the sort of institutionalization of white male hegemony is starting to break down, which is a good thing. It also means that some of the roles that those gatekeepers played around understanding and dictating credibility and authority have also broken down. And we don't have great substitutes. We haven't created a new social contract for how we want to communicate, how we want to consume information, and how we want greater connectivity to work in a world where we are all parts of that graph. And it's that lack of new language and the lack of those new agreements that leaves us all feeling a little bit at sea in a landscape that is totally different than the one that we were taught.
Before I ask the next question, how many people know what TikTok is? Wow, a lot. Man, I guess I was just really irrelevant. So it's, we're taught, now that we know the landscape, I think it's, why do these media platforms really resonate? Why do they work, and why are people drawn to them, especially young people? When Dave and I were talking, it's the number one job that a young person wants is to be a YouTube influencer. And so, what is it that gives them a unique perspective to express themselves, and what are the benefits of these platforms?
Yeah, well, of all those people who raise your hands about knowing TikTok, how many people are on the platform? Okay. I knew somewhere we'd have a hand drop on. So the number one thing kids want to be when they grow up is a social influencer. It's like number 1 and 2, a YouTube star. 5 and 6 is a rock star, an actor, which is at the top of what it was when I was growing up. Although the thing I wanted to be when I was growing up was a fire truck. The truck was the coolest. My dreams changed. And what I think is really interesting about what Michael was saying and how media is changing, and we're kind of awash in it, is the number one kind of content that Gen Z, so younger people, are watching by a wide margin is content from the top 100 influencers or creators on these platforms. So people who have grown up organically on the YouTubes and TikToks. More of that content is being consumed, at least over the summer, from Gen Z than the top 100 media companies, what they put out. So there's been this huge change in what's happened. And I think for platforms like YouTube, like TikTok, what we're seeing is not an extension of traditional storytelling and production. What we're seeing is just another way, another outlet for human expression. So it is coming into the same idea of expression that language has. But imagine if instead of trying to express yourself to your friends with language, you could just take a video, which is a lot more about how we think about our experiences with the world. So there's a very fundamental part of being a person that some of these platforms are allowing us to communicate in, but I think the rules and what it means and how we have controls for it, all of that is so new, but the reason why these platforms are so successful is it's a great way to express yourself, and we're seeing that happen in all kinds of ways. And that's, I think, the part for folks who are not children and not young or not on the platforms, that magic of just expressing who you are, that's what's being captured in some ways allowing people to do things that we couldn't do before.
Thank you. And one of the traditional ways that we've been expressing ourselves, and really Take-Two has been expressing itself, is through film. That is now a traditional media source. And so Christy, this is, pass the mic. You work with traditional media and the very unique framework of people sitting in a black room with no phone paying attention. And, you know, and all the work and movement building that can come from that activity. So, you know, how does that work?
It's real hard. Ask a young person to watch a 90-minute documentary without their phone. It's pretty much, it's very difficult. So part of my job is I work in the traditional film space, typically documentary social issue films on different social issues, and ask people to watch, engage, and take action in some way. And that does skew a little bit older. So we look at like what the next generation is interested in, where they get their information. They're not watching a Michael Moore documentary. They're actually following Greta Thunberg on Twitter and Instagram, and maybe TikTok, but I'm not on that either. So for us, we look at different avenues. Who are young people listening to? We work with a lot of schools. We work with a lot of high schools. So we worked on a great film called Science Fair, and it was about kids competing in a science fair, high school kids. And we found it really resonated with science teachers, and they brought it into their schools. We had over 5,000 screenings, and the kids were really engaged in it. They started following the kids who were in the film on social media. We surveyed the kids and the teachers. There was 90% of the kids were more interested in science after seeing it. And part of that is there's something to be said about spending a fair amount of time, a decent amount of focused attention on a story, which part of me gets a little bit nervous in how divided everyone's attention is in social media right now. But I think we also have to think about what film is. Film isn't really 90 minutes anymore. Film could be a 10-hour series on Netflix. Film is following someone on Instagram and seeing bits of their life over days, over weeks, and over years. Stories just taking a different shape. So film to me is not just that 90-minute old media. Film takes many different shapes.
Amazing. And I love that you work with kids and just, you know, how are you using media to create this bigger educational experience? And then Jason, you're the one that really works in the classroom. Like, you know, how are you using media to transform the learning experience? At Lincoln, what have you found?
Yeah. So I actually want to show you guys a little bit about how we think about this work. I think about this work from the classroom standpoint. So there's an image, this image here. So Christy just mentioned Greta Thunberg. Who's actually seen this image before? So this was last year, as you guys know, outside, I think she's Sweden, so outside of like some government building in Sweden. And this young lady, I think she was probably 15 years old at that time, took this picture and basically did like a one-person climate strike. So the next slide, I happened to be in New York yesterday, so I was able to see the incredible presence that young people had throughout the city. And this was like a 4 million person, they're estimating, around the world protest around, or strike around like, why is not more happening around the climate? And so I wanted to share this because this is actually a representation of a young person who's actually leveraging media in an extremely powerful way, right? And so many comments up here have actually focused back to this idea of creativity, of expression, of how are young people actually in a position to like even know how to do these things. And you think about it, for most of us, when we think about classrooms, probably the image that's conjured in your mind of a classroom is one that doesn't look too dissimilar to maybe what we're doing right now, which is the teacher in the front and students in rows. And for most of the time, the teacher kind of delivering an instruction to students, while students are kind of in a more passive learning experience, right? So also, by show of hands, whose upbringing with education resembles something like that? And look around the room, right? So then we have to ask ourselves, and the truth of it is, many of our classrooms still look like that. So then we have to ask ourselves, where are young people now actually learning creativity? Where are they learning expression, right? And sadly, many classrooms aren't delivering that. So, next slide. So the work that my organization does, so I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of a company called Link, which is actually in the work of school transformation. And what we actually believe is for us to prepare young people for the world that they're actually stepping into, a world where choosing a career is not going to be like how we chose to be a thing. For them, the thing that they might choose to be in 5, 6, 7 years may actually no longer be a thing because robots now do that thing, right? For them, actually switching careers multiple times throughout their lives might not be a fun thing to do, but a necessity. For them, right now, you look at the most sought after skill on LinkedIn in the year 2018 was creativity. And then we have to really question how are our classrooms preparing students for that? So what we've created with Link is essentially a framework of how we can actually begin to shift classrooms to bring the kinds of experiences, the kinds of media, the kinds of learning that's actually going to be relevant for students into the classroom. So I'll point to just one of those and give you guys one quick example. So there's one on there called Authentic Audience, right? And essentially what that is it's a practice of a teacher where they might actually create a project in a classroom where students do something that actually has a real audience. Greta Thunberg, right? How do you learn this? So one of our classrooms, a teacher was doing a very simple, informative writing, right? It was an assignment for informative writing. For most kids, you bring up informative writing, they're like, all right, put me to sleep, wake me up when I have to actually take the test, or whatever you want me to do, right? So what this teacher did was, had the students choose an area of interest that they wanted to research. Then they co-wrote articles. Then they actually created a classroom magazine to publish the magazine to the school. So what started off as a very simple informative writing assignment became this creative, authentic audience, collaboration, an entirely different experience that actually brought students to the center of the learning. So that's the work that we're doing, and we believe media is such an important part of how students can actually step into what we call agents of their learning, which means they're owning more of that process, not being just passive receivers of a lecture from a teacher.
I love that. There's so much. There's so much in having agency and having options around our life and our education. And so, our point of view is that media literacy allows for huge possibility. And so I'm just going to have everyone go down and just answer one question real short. Slavey, I'm having you go last. So I know that I know that this one is one that you think about a lot. What makes you optimistic about the future of media literacy? And yeah, was that
Okay. I really am optimistic. It's the access is what has caused a lot of the problems. It's been a real game changer. Our kids can be reached really by anyone at any time at this point. I just think back when my kids were small, but my concern seems so quaint now. It was like keep the computer in the living room so you can see what they're doing, and now screens are everywhere and they can be reached everywhere. But that's really the opportunity too, because with media literacy, get media literate, we can advocate for the media that we want, and we can make it ourselves.
Jason?
So I'll be sure this one. What makes me optimistic is that the young people are ready. They're already pushing us. So what makes me optimistic is I think we're entering a space now where, for better or for worse, they're realizing that the adults are not doing what we're supposed to be doing, and they're kind of like, we got to step up. So you're seeing a lot of young people who are actually being willing to actually take their voice and make it heard. And I think that's actually what we're seeing in schools is the mindset shift that actually needs to happen. It actually can happen. You can have a teacher, you can have a principal, I've seen have a light bulb go off because they're seeing a shift that needs to take place in how we think about what learning looks like, what media can actually be, how students engage with their learning process, etc. So students really, they're the ones who are ready. I think we're the ones who are catching up in many ways. I think it's very possible.
What gets me excited, I think it's already happening. Like young people are already participating in it. They're already, because they're making their own social media posts, their own videos, like they already see what reality looks like. I think two things. One, they're already doing it. Two, technology. On the adult side, so watching those kids' videos, like I got to do that. I was really lucky that I got to do that in my high school too. But it was extremely expensive and not everybody did. We had big computers and big cameras and everything you can do on your phone now. So I think it's that technology's gotten easier to make it more accessible for far more kids to participate in that type of education. And then just a third thing, actually just listening to you talk, are educators and teachers to be more open to this, just across the board. It's not the same education system that I grew up with, my parents grew up with. It's getting more creative and inventive.
Right. right now, everyone is connected and the human experience across all digital platforms in a way that makes us almost all into cyborgs. We can reach out to anybody in the world we want right now, and we all have, probably within inches of our body, computers that are more powerful than anybody else had growing up starting 15, 20 years ago. So the human experience has changed. I think the kids are already incredibly media literate, and I'm very optimistic about media literacy because as those tools are coming in, it's so important for us to shape how kids use that and also how parents understand it so we can guide them, because things are happening so quickly that that side of media literacy needs to be for both, because we're kind of learning this and it's happening so quickly as it's being built. And so it becomes so central that we think about the responsibility of it and the creation of it.
Michael.
Building on, I want to just build on what Christy and Jason were saying, that I think the reality here is that a landscape that is more participatory and is less passive has been terrifying for people my age, but it is very natural for people younger than me. And I think that the reality is that it should have been empowering. It should, a graph in a world in which we all have this kind of responsibility and power for creativity and creation and storytelling. The people who control the stories of culture are the powerful people in culture. And I think because we grew up in a world that was passive, where information was passive, where we were mostly audience and consumer, it's been uncertain for adults. And I think if we can embrace the reality that the next generation is going to do better and be better than us, we can get out of their way and enable them to claim the power that was promised to us with greater connectivity. Like, the possibility has always been right in front of us, and it's been our unwillingness to step into it that has kept us being under-ambitious. And that is not a disease that we need to pass on to the next generation.
Love it. I'm going to say I'm optimistic because people like Megan Kiefer are thought leaders in this, and like that your kids are involved in it. Like, it's good, it's attracting the right people. And these are really important tools. We do have time for one or two questions. If anyone, oh yes, we can speak real loud.
My name is Sam. I have a question. Is there a way, and maybe this is what Take Two is doing, to facilitate programs like this in public schools so inner city kids could get involved and we could start at spreading it so it's not just one select group of rich kids that get to have media literacy?
I can probably
We'll get to that.
I can probably start to answer. Yeah, but it's, one of the things is also the missing middle, which is what Take Two Take Two Media Initiative works on, which is that a lot of this work is subsidized by governments, go to the lower income schools, and then the really prosperous schools that have strong PTAs, those get subsidized. But there's a sliver in the middle that our work's going to focus on that also needs a lot of attention. So the answer is yes and yes. Okay, one quick question, and then I know we got to keep a short show. Yes. Yes.
This is not a big question, but maybe it's something to think about. So I've been in journalism for about 25 years, and I started in print. I just want to frame it. I started in print and then moved to digital first. And the thing that worries me the most, and I see this, I do a lot of volunteer work for the News Literacy Project. The thing that worries me the most when I go into high schools, public high schools, is that there doesn't seem to be a clear understanding between fact and opinion. And I worry about that in this media landscape. I'm optimistic. I mean, I started embracing digital media, digital journalism in 2004, 2005, but I'm really worried about that. And I'm worried about it in film, and I just would love to hear what you think. Because I think it's a huge problem for this world. So many of us are sort of liberal thinkers, but how are we getting that conservative opinion so that we know our leaders?
Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I'm a journalist. It's kind of scary out there. Our idea is that we reach across the country, state by state, education policies made in the states. And so we're putting together legislation that has the Department of Education bring together an advisory council to find recommendations and and get over the barriers to getting them into the schools. And we are working in blue states and red states across the country. So Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado just passed something. So the idea is we need to have media literacy be considered an essential element, just like reading or math, not just based on a program here or there, but this is part of education, it's literacy.
Also, just real quick from the film side, especially documentary film, it's follow the money, like look who's funding it. It's a big part of what we do, like not just who's on screen, but who's paying for it. And we just got caught in something recently where we love the film, we love the scripts, we love the actresses in it, whole thing. And then after we started working on it, it took a bit of a turn. We're like, this is so interesting. Why are we kind of going in this direction for the campaign? And we followed the money a little bit tighter. We realized there's actually there's a conservative body behind it that was using this film to kind of get people to pay attention to this issue, to get them to pay attention to that other issue. I'm being cryptic because I'm really mad at it, but like we did not follow the money close enough, and now we have to extract ourselves from it. So I guess that's media literacy. Who's paying for it?
Yeah.
Just one more thing, I know we got to move on, is that I think the media literacy piece has a lot to do with our personal responsibility and how we act and how we discern and how we understand the differences between news and entertainment. I think there's also a ton of blame and responsibility on platform companies and distributors and in journalism itself that we have in chasing, trying to sort of revive a business model that has not worked for 20 years or so. More and more news is driven by the same attention-based business model as entertainment and social media and other kinds of things. And if your business is optimized for attention, you're only accidentally optimizing for truth. And it means that we need to find ways of distinguishing between what is entertainment and what is commentary, what is news and what is commentary. And there's a lot of responsibility to go around for that, and we've all got to take the responsibility with ours.
I just have a question. Isn't that what textbooks are right now? Like growing up, the history in textbooks, it's not all real, it's not all truth, it's a narrative that they pushed out. So it's the same thing with, I just don't understand what the difference is.
It's like who's telling the story.
Right.
I think this is such a robust topic that, requires,
this went left.
No, this is like, the cliff notes, your intro to media literacy and getting an overview, and, there's just so much more to dive into and so much more attention that needs to be brought to this topic, which is why we're here. This is step one. So with that, I hope you enjoyed your intro and learned something.